Hey there, internets. So, always got to do the Saturday night video. We got a little problem, and that's too many politicians being too old and possibly unable to serve. And it's kind of that thing of what's the right thing? Like with term limits. Do you have term limits and possibly have a constant turnover of people who are good and then they're out and then they move on? Or do you not have term limits and have corrupt people get stuck in there and you can't get them out, or you get people that can't get out of there? And you look into that and you ask, what should you have? There's some people that feel that judges should have an age limit, and you got to ask, what is the right thing? Well, the founders in this little document, they didn't want these snot-nosed brats taking over. Can you imagine a bunch of 19-year-olds? And there are some liberal Democrats out there that think, oh no, this generation's so much more knowledgeable. Bullcrap. I'm up here, got a copy of the Federalist Papers up on my top of my desk here. I'm reading that thing and I'm having to go back, and they're talking about Greek city-states, writing for an audience that apparently would know who they were talking about, and Greek confederacies, because they spent so much time studying every little thing. And tinkering with the Constitution after I read that, I am very, very hesitant to do so, even for a good cause. Because everything they did, they had a reason. Even if they didn't have, it wasn't always the best idea in retrospect. For instance, they should have had a plan to end slavery peacefully instead of just kicking the can down the road, is probably the most obvious example. And sometimes we found that things are better adjusted. And I remember I was talking about when Rick Santorum was running in 2012, and I was chatting with my martial arts instructor, and he says he didn't like the guy because he was just some punk person who didn't have any experience. He's been a senator for 2 terms and congressman before that. He says, he has? Well, a lot of people who are not into politics, especially if it's not your side, you might not know who some of these people are. I get it. I mean, I know a person, one of the only 2 black men in the Senate. She's mixed race. She didn't know who Tim Scott was, who happened to be Jim DeMint's hand-picked successor. And what brought me to doing this tonight was, we've had Mitch McConnell engage in these freeze-ups. And I posted my video about that, saying he needs to step down. He does. And a friend of mine from my previous job said that his own blood pressure meds got off, and it made him have a similar incident. And maybe that's what's going on. It's a short-term thing, can be fixed. But at this point, maybe it's time that he say, let's start a transition away. And what brought this about is a Republican has come forth with a proposed constitutional amendment. Everything linked in the description below. And I may or may not include this. Do I want to include this the Fox News version? I'm going to not include that one. Just delete that. But I'm also going to include a link to a text of a resolution proposed by Senator Ted Cruz for term limits, which is the standard 3 terms in the House, 2 terms in the Senate. And it doesn't fix the problem immediately either, because anybody who's already served a couple of however many terms, it doesn't apply to them. And then yet, of course, if it could get through the House and Senate, it could not. It still has to get approved by the states and within 7 years. But this article from Newsweek about it happened to be on my Microsoft Start page. It would make 52 members of Congress ineligible to serve. And it says here, A Republican congressman wants an age limit for politicians that would apply to presidents, vice presidents, and all members of Congress. Michigan Representative John James has introduced legislation that would amend the Constitution and prevent someone from running for office if at any time during the term the person would be 75 years of age or older. The resolution comes amid a wave of scrutiny on both sides of the aisle of some lawmakers and their ages. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, 81, has been a senator since 1985, way longer than I had realized. And has had 2 speech freezing episodes in the past 2 months. Democrat Dan Feinstein, who was elected in 1992, has been a focus of concern over her health and faced calls to step aside. I mean, Patty Murray literally had to just say A, instead of when she started to read from some prepared remarks. They're having to wheel her in a wheelchair. Babylon Bee decided to parody it, saying that there's a puppeteer that's moving her arms from behind. At age 80, Joe Biden is already the oldest sitting president. He'll be 82 if he takes office after winning a second term in 2024, and at 86 when the term ends. That's old, and you can decline real fast. And in polling, Democrats have expressed worries about his age and cited as a top concern. Noah Sadler, James's communications director, told Newsweek this bill is a signal that John thinks it's time for a new generation to take the reins of our federal government. Doesn't matter the party, we have a generation of young leaders ready to serve. He continued, it's time, we all know it, and John's introducing legislation on it. Look at the stats. I think the overwhelming majority of Americans are ready for fresh meat at the federal level. I would think that lots of Dems would be in support of this legislation. The world is not getting slower, it's getting faster, James told Fox News Digital. The world's not getting safer, it's getting more dangerous. The world's not getting any younger, and we have a lower bound. It just makes sense to have an upper bound. James specifically mentions Feinstein, McConnell, and Biden, saying you can't watch a video and tell me that everything's okay. He said the nation's adversaries are viewing this as a weakness, that America's lost a step. Currently, there are 36 members of the House and 16 members of the Senate who are at least 75 and would be disqualified from serving if James's proposed legislation becomes law. Of these House members, 15 are 80 or older. California Democrat Grace Napolitano is 86. And I'm not going to read through all the people that it lists here. Nancy Pelosi is going to run for re-election at 83? Seriously? She's been majority leader or speaker up until this term since at least 2006, I think 2004. Chuck Grassley in Iowa, he's been the senator there for so long, it's like a quarter of the state of the time it's been a state. They've had Chuck Grassley as the senator. Think about how long that is. And of course, Donald Trump is 77. And this guy, like an idiot, has also proposed this while endorsing Trump. And that's not a comment on Trump's views, but it's a concern for me. Trump's age is a concern. I mean, and you're caught between this. The knowledge, there's institutional knowledge in being in elected office for a certain length of time. That's good to have, especially when you're dealing at the level that is the federal level. You're talking international relations. You got to have that. At the same time, you need new blood. You need to force some people out. I honestly think term limits would take care of most of it, because most people would look at somebody funny if they're saying, yeah, I'm running for Congress for the first time when you're 80 years old. And honestly, some term limits would force people out. It'd cap them. Talk about judicial appointments. I actually don't think that's a place for an age limit or a specific term, because in the Federalist Papers up there, Madison talks about how you're trying to insulate the Supreme Court from considerations of if I rule on this, who's going to be my successor, or am I going to get reappointed if you can be multiple terms? That's why they did that. They wanted to insulate the Supreme Court from that. And honestly, the Supreme Court doesn't generally cover anything of such vital national immediate interest. I mean, they're very national interest issues, but they're not having to make a snap decision on foreign affairs of, oh, Russia just invaded Ukraine at 2 o'clock in the morning. What do we do? When you're president, you do need to make those kind of decisions. You need to make them like that. Can't be, Mr. President, wake up. Take out of your wheelchair and out of your blanket now. We'll give you some ice cream, but you got to make a decision on what's going to happen. Honestly, Joe Biden's people, the 25th Amendment, its provision for removing a sick or incapacitated president is entirely there for the situation of Joe Biden. And it means that your own people have to say, this man is no longer capable of serving. It's designed deliberately so your own people would have to turn on you. And that is a check and balance in that system to prevent someone from removing a president for partisan reasons. That's why, you can't, a bunch of people appointed by Congress can't do it. There's reasons they design it this way. So I think this guy's hearts, should be in the right place, but the methodology is more Senator Cruz's to do it is to get term limits, because Chuck Grassley would have been gone long ago. And you step back and say Reagan would have been ineligible under this proposed amendment to run for his second term. Would that have been a good idea? Because then we would have had George H.W. Bush for 4 years and probably not for 8, and who knows who we would have had come 1988. You start saying what ifs, and that might not seem like such a great idea. We have term limits on president, but realistically, voters, and this includes primary voters, need to think about that before going into it. And when you do have an older president, you better be thinking long and hard about what that VP candidate is like. Are they articulate, or are they Kamala Harris? Kamala Harris can't do anything better than a word salad of random phrases that are poll tested, if that. So that'll all be linked in the description below. But it's time for some of these people to step aside. And if you really want to be involved in politics at 80, you can be an activist, you can be an elder statesman. I'm sure that you could even say maybe make an argument for certain political appointee positions or a state legislative race. That's less of a concern. You're not making none of your, as you go further down the totem pole of life in politics, the impact of you becoming incapacitated or being unable to serve after you've been elected becomes of less concern. And you can still make that difference if you still want to be active, involved. Because the kind of people that get involved in politics for that long, like a lot of things, you obviously have a passion for it, even if it's just a passion for power, which is your average Democrat. Or, so you're sitting there saying, I want to be involved, I always want to be involved. There's so many ways to do it. You don't have to just get out of politics. You could be even helping train and educate the next generation. There's so many opportunities for that. These guys do not need to be in there that long. There's so many octogenarians that it's time they go. And really think about it for both the Republican and the Democratic primaries, no matter who you are, which side of that you're on. Because it's a mark against Trump for me. Makes me think Vivek Ramaswamy looks a lot better. Ron DeSantis, Tim Scott look a lot better when I look at them compared to Trump. So, till then, Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you all later.